Aloha and welcome. My name is Tammy Andersland and I am co-owner here with Dr. John Lidgate. And this is our gallery, Ship Store Gallery. And it is our goal to tell you the story of contact with Captain Cook through the paintings of Raymond Massey. And we try to bring history to life and make it exciting and not some dull, boring history class where you want to nod off and go to sleep. I'm a historical journalist, a historical writer. My partner's a historian. He has a PhD in history, a Yale graduate. And we thought, you know what, let's put our team together, and we started the Pacific Journal History Magazine. And some of the things that we write about are hanging on the walls here in this gallery. So we're going to share with you the moment of contact with Captain James Cook. It all started in the early morning hours of January 18th, 1778, right here in James Cook's stateroom. Midshipman Samuel Chapman walks into Cook's stateroom and he said, "Sir, we've just spotted land on the horizon." So this is taking place back here in the Resolution.
Here's a picture
Right
of Cook.
here. Just as dawn lit the horizon, they spotted land right there. It was an island, and they tried all day long to get into that island, but the currents and the winds were not in their favor, so they had to tack all night, and by dawn's early light the next morning, they discovered a new island, and it was Kauai. They tried to come ashore between Kapa'a and Waipuli, but the reef was too big. They couldn't get in, so they tacked just a little further south, and when they did, the moment of contact occurred, right in Niwili Wili Harbor in Lahui. That morning, the Hawaiians were in the village in their bay, fishing and preparing for their day, when they looked up and described seeing the forest jut up out of the sea. And what it was the mast off the Discovery and Resolution. They thought Captain Cook was a god Lono coming back because of the big billowing white sails coming from the heavens. Plus, Captain Cook had stark white hair. The Hawaiians were shocked. They paddled out to the boats. The doctor on board the Resolution spoke Polynesian, and he said, "We come in peace, and we're looking for a safe harbor, a safe anchorage." And the Hawaiians welcomed them. And they said, "If you need a safe harbor, it's winter, you must go south." So they went just a little further south and came to the next village of Poipu. They spent the night off of Poipu, and by dawn's early light the next morning, actually went further south and came ashore at Waimea. And Waimea is just right over here. And that was Captain Cook's landing, right up there, at Waimea. The date was January 19th, 1778, and from that moment on, life changed drastically for the Hawaiian Islands. It would never be the same. The Hawaiians were living in the Stone Age when Cook arrived, but suddenly, overnight, literally went to the Iron Age, and I'll tell you why. This piece right here would actually lead to the death of Captain Cook nearly 1 year later. Hawaiians were still using stone tools for all of their tapa designs, their tattooing, their hunting and gathering. But when Cook came, he had something they had never seen before, metal, iron. And he brought it with him. And they started trading the Hawaiians for food. They would give them 3 spikes for a pig. And the Hawaiians, once they got their hands on this, loved it. It made their life so much easier. It helped them with their tapa, their tattooing. It just made life, in general, a lot easier for them. Well, Captain Cook stayed in the islands for a couple of months, then he left, and he went back to the north coast of the United States, on up into Canada and the Alaskan waters. They were looking for the Northwest Passage, and they couldn't find it. And then winter started closing in on them, and it was freezing cold, and ice started closing in on the Discovery and Resolution. And Cook remembered those warm waters of the Sandwich Islands. So what did he do? He turned his boats back around and came right back into Hawaii. And this time, he went to the Big Island. And he was down at Kealakekua Bay, right here, on the Big Island. The date now is February 13th, 1779, a year since he had discovered the islands, and he called them the Sandwich Islands, and he named them that because of his dear friend, the Earl of Sandwich, John Montagu, the fourth Earl of Sandwich. And so he came into the islands, and John Montagu, the Earl of Sandwich, gave him money for his scientific journeys. And so Cooks thought he was doing a nice thing by naming them the Sandwich Islands. And here's the Earl of Sandwich right there. That's John Montagu.
Who does he look like?
George Washington, I think. I think he looks just like George. So, they're named the Sandwich Islands. Cook's back in Hawaii. It's February 13th, 1779. He's preparing to pack up his boats and go over to Maui. Well, he's noticed now that one of his lifeboats is missing off the Resolution, and he's very upset. If you're a mariner and you go down at sea, you want to make sure all of your lifeboats are present and accounted for. But one was missing. Cook was furious. So he sent his chiefs ashore, and they kidnapped a tribal chief and used him as hostage. And they went out to sea, and a wicked, wicked storm came up in the channel, a horrible storm. Hurricane-force gales were blowing, bolts of lightning were coming down. Raymond Massey painted this picture, and he called it the storm that killed a god. A bolt of lightning came down and struck the Resolution on the mainmast and snapped it. The sailors, the winds were roaring so loud and the winds were so fierce that they couldn't keep their boats on course. Cook was cut and bleeding profusely when the mast snapped. So what they did is they turned their boats around and they headed right back to Kealakekua Bay. And when they did, the Hawaiians were standing around watching him come in, and they said, this is really strange. You're bleeding. Gods don't bleed. And your boat's broken. If you were a god, that wouldn't have happened to your boat. And if you were a god, you wouldn't have falsely accused a chief of stealing. You would have known who stole your boat. You're no god. And a horrible fight broke out on land at Kealakekua Bay. Captain Cook was clubbed and stabbed, along with 4 other sailors, and died. And Raymond Massey painted the scene of Cook's death.
It was a famous portrait by John Weber. It's after Weber's journals of the death of Captain Cook.
Right.
It's a very famous picture.
And very sad. So that was the end of Captain Cook. Well, 2 nights later, the sailors have gone back out. They're about a half a mile off at sea, still off Kealakekua Bay, thinking, we can't just leave our captain and our shipmates' bodies here. We want their bodies back. We want to take them home and bury them, or give them a proper burial at sea. 2 nights later, just after sunset, they noticed a medicine man, a kahuna, rowing across Kealakekua Bay. And they watched him row right up to the side of their ship, the Resolution, and he had a package with him, and he asked for permission to come aboard, and they had him come on, and he went to the quarterdeck and unwrapped the top of package, and in it was an 8-pound piece of flesh from the thigh of Captain Cook. You want your body back, your captain's body back, you're going to get it in pieces. The Hawaiians held the belief that certain bones held certain powers, had certain mana, and the thigh bones apparently were very powerful. Well, 2 nights after that, the same medicine man came rowing back across the bay, and he had a pair of severed hands. And they noticed, the shipmates noticed that one of the hands on the left hand had a huge scar on it. Captain Cook 4 years earlier had been in a keg powder explosion, and he had a severe gash and scar on his left hand. So they noticed that, yes, those were the hands of their captains. So they got as many of the remains back as they could. On the 19th of February, they turned their boat around facing out to sea. They dropped the flag to half-mast. They did a burial at sea for the remains of their shipmates and their Captain Cook. They did a 10-gun salute, and they left Kealakekua Bay in the Hawaiian Islands and went back to England. He and Captain Cook.